Are you ready for an adrenaline-pumping adventure? It all starts with Blondie, that girl with shoulder-length blonde hair, getting ready for a risky plan with her troublesome boyfriend. Imagine the tense atmosphere. A quick kiss that seals their fate before she pulls out the gun, pointing it directly at the poor cashier. While her boyfriend fiddles with the cash register and gets the car ready, Blondie tries to convince the cashier to open the safe. And here comes the unusual part. The cashier, with an air of mystery, reveals to her that inside that safe is the life she always wanted. Can you believe it? Blondie, thinking it's a tactic to get more money, pushes him to the limit, and, when everything points to a gunshot, boom! Scene change. Now I take you to a forest, one of those that seems straight out of a fairy tale. In the midst of solitude appears Miss Charming, with an expression that tells you she's lost. And when you think things can't get any stranger, she finds a cabin where there is, no more, no less, a bag of food and an old radio. Just when she's relaxed and enjoying the food, bam! There's a noise and Mr. Muscles appears, a burly guy carrying an axe. You can imagine Miss Charming running to hide like the devil himself is after her, under the bed. But when she comes out and runs into Mr. Muscles face to face, it turns out the guy just wants to help. Crazy, right? Remember Miss Charming, lost in that fairy tale forest? Well, while she was with Mr. Muscles, she told him how she ended up in that place. Imagine a whole day without eating anything, with that hunger that churns your stomach. She's in that forest because her car broke down, like a stone without gasoline. And to top it off, her husband went to look for fuel and, bam, disappeared like those ghosts you see in movies. She's in the middle of nowhere with Mr. Muscles, who, by the way, is also in the same situation. And to make matters worse, the weather the night before was the kind that makes you freeze just thinking about it. So imagine Miss Charming, worried about her husband, taking out a cigarette to relax a bit, and Mr. Muscles, always on the lookout, asks for a light for a bonfire to keep warm and all. And now, the part that will leave you wanting more. They decide to inspect the car. Mr. Muscles goes into mechanic mode, but there's no way. The car is dry, without a drop of gasoline. Miss Charming, with that feminine sixth sense, is a little suspicious of her new friend, but decides to stay in the car waiting. However, Mr. Muscles, being the gentleman that he is, decides to keep her company. You know, night falls quickly in those woods, so they think about going back to the cabin, but not before leaving a note for her husband in case he shows up. As they walk towards that cabin, which seems straight out of a fairy tale, you know what happens. Miss Charming, maybe because she feels a little uncomfortable or simply because nature called, asks for a bathroom. Mr. Muscles, with that smile of his that makes you think seriously, tells her that the whole majestic forest is the bathroom. You can imagine it, right? She tries to find a discreet place while he keeps walking, and when you're thinking that everything is going to calm down, bam! They tell you that water and food are super scarce. You can imagine it, right? In the middle of nowhere, with almost nothing. And if that doesn't surprise you, get ready for this. Miss Charming reveals that she's expecting a baby, and that's why she didn't want to walk too much. Imagine being pregnant in the middle of the forest. How crazy is that? That night, while she sleeps, the girl has one of those really intense dreams where she tries to call for help. And when dawn breaks, what happens? Well, Mr. Muscles, like the good Samaritan he is, goes off looking for gasoline from his car, which, by the way, had an accident. But here comes the kicker. Miss Charming finds Blondie, the one from the robbery at the beginning, passed out, and as if that weren't enough, while taking care of her, she finds a little toy airplane. Suddenly, a wind that seems straight out of a horror movie slams the door shut and wakes up Blondie, who, totally confused, thinks that Miss Charming kidnapped her. But don't worry, everything gets cleared up. Meanwhile, Mr. Muscles does his thing and takes the gasoline from his car to put it in the lady's. And here comes the most random thing, bro. He picks up a shoe. Yes, a shoe. Who knows why? But anyway, as he returns, he hears something that sounds like a gunshot, and of course, like in any good story, he gets scared and spills the gasoline. After Blondie decides to take a walk through that mysterious forest and finds nothing interesting, she returns to the cabin. But Miss Charming, showing a side of her we haven't seen before, scolds her for her manners and tells her that they are practically in the middle of nowhere, with no communication with the outside world. You can feel the tension in the air, right? But wait, just then, Mr. Muscles appears on the scene, showing the shoe he had picked up. And look, he gets quite a surprise when he sees Blondie. Can you imagine him, with that look of, "What's she doing here now?" The situation feels even more intense because, for some reason, Blondie doesn't seem to trust our strongman very much. Although she tries to leave again, Mr. Muscles, perhaps worried about her, or simply because he's a good guy, warns her about the cold that can fall at night. But nothing is free in this life, you know? If she wants to stay, she has to contribute something. Her lighter. But things don't end there, because when night falls, while Mr. Muscle is busy reinforcing the door, Blondie, with her somewhat acidic humor, starts joking about how Miss Charming and he slept, and the atmosphere becomes even more tense when she says she doesn't trust him and even thinks he could be a murderer. But the guy, trying to be reasonable, tells her that he's trapped there too. So, in the end, they decide to leave things alone and sleep. That morning, after waking up from one of those nightmares that feel so real, in which someone was putting something weird in her blood, Blondie, with her batteries charged, sets out to explore the forest looking for a way out. But Miss Charming, with a somewhat worried look, tells her a bit of gossip, that Mr. Muscles had already tried to get them out of there, but nothing, there was no way. However, our friend Blondie, with her adventurous spirit, decides to take another path to see if luck smiles on her. Please, if you are enjoying the video, show it with your valuable like. It's just a second for you, and it helps me a lot. Now, surprise! When Blondie returns to the cabin, she runs into Miss Charming, who, upon seeing Blondie trembling like a leaf in the wind, hands her a blanket just like that, in a chill way. In the middle of a chat, Miss Charming tells her that she was on a trip to her in-laws' house with her husband before this mess in the forest. And by the way, those in-laws didn't really like her very much because of religious issues, and, as if that weren't enough, she's also expecting a baby in November. Oh, and it turns out that Blondie is also a November baby. Coincidence? And hey, the craziest thing is that the place where Blondie grew up turns out to be the same small town where Miss Charming's bosses come from. What a small world! Things heat up when at one point, the two of them start debating about where the heck they are. And while Mr. Muscles, like in one of those movies that make you think, finds himself back at the cabin, although he swears up and down that he walked in a straight line in the opposite direction, with furrowed brows, they begin to suspect that there is something strange about that cabin. As night falls like a war council, they decide that the next day they will march together to see if they can get out of the forest. And yes, the provisions are already running out, and that's hurrying things up. In the new day, with firm steps, they move forward, leaving the cabin behind, and, in the middle of the chatter, Blondie shares that she was raised by her grandparents because her parents were no longer around. But hold on tight. In the middle of the walk, they find a door in the ground that leads them to a very old military shelter. There, among other things, they find German sausages, a little wine and some maps, and Miss Charming, demonstrating her skills, deciphers that they are in Poland because, A, her boss was German, and she understands the language. And guess what? Blondie, with tears in her eyes, says that her father also went away to war. With new provisions and energy, they resume their journey. But oh dear, they end up again in that mysterious cabin. That night, in the midst of darkness, Mr. Muscles, with a nostalgic look, releases his life story. Listen, he grew up in an orphanage because his mother was sentenced, and hold on, he was on his way to that place of memories when, bam, he ended up in the cabin. But what makes your hair stand on end is that each one is in a different time wave. Miss Charming feels that she is in 64. Blondie goes for 85, and Mr. Muscles swears to be in 2011. And just when things couldn't get any weirder, bam! A shot echoes in the environment. Outside, a German soldier with an unfriendly face is scrutinizing them, waking up with the heat of the day. What a surprise! They are tied up thanks to the soldier. But wait, because this is where it gets crazier. Mr. Muscles shakes himself after a very strange dream, and when he comes to, they realize that they have traveled in time to the 1940s. Now everything makes sense. The shelter and the German soldier who put them in a bind. But when you think you've seen it all, the soldier enters the scene again and tells Mr. Muscles to come out, and that's not going to end well. In a struggle, Mr. Muscles breaks free and runs away, but the soldier is not far behind and manages to tie him to a tree. Upon returning, the guy finds a locket in Blondie's hands. When he opens it, he is stunned because inside there is a photo that looks familiar to him, and, to add to the mystery, Miss Charming takes out an identical one. In an unexpected turn of events, the soldier decides to take the girls to Mr. Muscles. But wait, this is where it gets good. Mr. Muscles, in a very clever move, surprises and knocks the soldier down immediately. The three of them tie him up in the cabin while they are intrigued by the mystery of that locket. But looking closely at the photo, they fall back when they discover that the woman is none other than Miss Charming's mother and Blondie's grandmother. Oh brother, and that's not all. They reveal that that soldier with the unfriendly face is Miss Charming's boss, that is, her husband, and that Blondie, that mysterious blonde, is her daughter. And hold on, there's more. Mr. Muscles, puffing out his chest, says that he has an identical locket and that he is Blondie's boy from the future, which leaves her dumbfounded because she never thought of having a child. With all that hot gossip, Miss Charming and Blondie share a moment of tears and hugs. There, the truth comes out that Miss Charming and her husband had a very sad fate, and that Blondie will be treated very badly by the parents of her child's father. Oh brother, everything points to the fact that the future of this family is darker than a moonless night. With a lump in her throat and her feelings on edge, Miss Charming plays a risky card. She decides to release the soldier, her own father, the man probably more confused than ever, who walks away with slow and heavy steps from the cabin. Now the trio of protagonists, formed by Miss Charming, Blondie, and Mr. Muscle, are left wondering how the heck they are going to get rid of this crazy destiny that is stalking them. Mr. Muscle, always the brains of the group, comes up with a very intense theory. He says that those strange dreams they have are like warnings from the future. According to him, Miss Charming is not going to survive the birth of her baby. Blondie is going to have problems with the law because of things she did, and Mr. Muscle himself is going to end up very badly because of a silly thing he is going to do. And there, at that moment, they all realize that they need to change that ending that destiny has prepared for them. Meanwhile, Miss Charming can't help but think about her boss, the soldier. She believes that a bomb will fall from the sky and he will say goodbye to this world. So they decide to move and arrive at the bomb shelter to check those maps. Mr. Muscle, with his head always scheming, thinks that if they manage to save the soldier, everything could change. Because if the soldier doesn't die, Miss Charming's mother wouldn't remarry and would be with her at the time of giving birth. That could mean that Miss Charming doesn't die, Blondie grows up with her mother, and Mr. Muscle finally has a proper family. What a mess. Let's see how it goes. Out of the blue, Mrs. Encanto notices that Rubia's birth scar has disappeared. Crazy, right? That's like a huge warning scream that something weird with the past is happening. Everyone realizes they need to protect the soldier in that shelter because otherwise, he's going to end up dead from an attack. But my goodness, when they try to talk to him in the cabin, the guy goes into furious soldier mode and starts saying he has a military duty. Mrs. Encanto, desperate, tries to reason with him, warning him that things don't look good for him, but the guy is in his own world. Then, Mr. Muscle, who is not far behind, decides to intervene, but things get tense, and boom, a shot is heard. And guess what? Rubia is the one who gets injured. No way! The soldier runs out of there and Mr. Muscle, super distressed, yells at Mrs. Encanto that she has to save Rubia. And of course, because if not, he's going to disappear. What a mess, brother. There goes Mr. Muscle, chasing the soldier through the forest. Imagine that. Full-on pursuit. And suddenly, click, he realizes the bullets are gone. These two go hand to hand, fists flying everywhere. But you know what's the craziest thing? Just when they were in full combat, the noise of a bomber plane breaks everything, and the soldier, seeing that things are getting ugly, runs away. Our Mr. Muscle, without hesitation, instead of following the soldier, goes in the opposite direction. He's convinced that the mysterious forest has some trick up its sleeve to get back to the cabin, and he was not wrong. Because after that crazy race, after so much back and forth, the two end up back in the cabin again. What madness! Hey, the soldier, seeing Mr. Muscle in front of him, starts shooting at him over and over. But surprise, it seems like Mr. Muscle has eaten spinach or something because not a scratch. Now, before you get excited, things get sad because our hero, Mr. Muscle, starts to disappear. Poor Rubia. It turns out she died, and that affects Mr. Muscle's future. And of course, who wouldn't be devastated? Well, Mrs. Encanto, with eyes full of sadness and anger, doesn't know what to do. But wait, there's more. Mrs. Encanto realizes that the air attack is heading straight for them, fast. And with that voice only she has, she convinces the soldier that if they want to have a future, they need to find shelter now. What a twist. As these two run towards the shelter, the atmosphere fills with deafening noises from the explosions and, oh my goodness, one of those explosions hits Mrs. Encanto, knocking her down. The soldier, showing that human side no one saw coming, in a burst of adrenaline, carries her like a hero and manages to reach the shelter, slamming the door shut. But wait, the story gets even more intense. Upon seeing her, he realizes that Mrs. Encanto also begins to disappear. How intense! In a super emotional moment, the soldier takes out a photo of his girl and, in parallel, we see Rubia fading away in the cabin. My God, a missile hits the cabin and there's a massive explosion. But brother, here comes the craziest part. Everything starts to rewind. It's like someone hit the rewind button on time. I didn't see that coming. We find ourselves back in that convenience store from the beginning. But there's a detail that changes everything. Rubia, our dear Rubia, looks so innocent and happy, as if all the bad things had never happened. And best of all, she lives in a lovely little house with her mother, Mrs. Encanto. But hey, that convenience store has something, because again, bam, an attempted robbery. And it's not the soldier this time. It's another couple. The woman, in a bossy manner, tells the cashier to open the safe. And guess what? That safe is the door to that crazy universe where everyone comes together in time and space. The cashier, scared, tries to tell her not to do it, that there are consequences. But she doesn't listen. And in a second of madness, she pulls the trigger and everything goes dark.